Tangent we did yesterday, sine and cosine are the same idea. All you have to know for the next week or two is the acronym SOHCAHTOA. SOHCAHTOA. You might want to write that on the top of your paper. If you can't spell it correctly, it's not going to help you, so make sure you know how to spell SOHCAHTOA. Yesterday, we learned that the tangent ratio is the length of the opposite side over the adjacent side. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. Today, we're learning that sine is equal to the opposite side over the hypotenuse. Oh, and cosine is equal to the adjacent leg over the hypotenuse. SOHCAHTOA. To see how the acronym tells you which goes over what? Okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah, see, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. SOHCAHTOA. If you take anything from my class this year, it'll be this. SOHCAHTOA. So you have on your left side, there's that triangle, and then it says sine of angle A. If you want, you can write that it's opposite over hypotenuse, but you also did just write it on the top. To the right of that, it says the cosine of angle A, and cosine is the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. Works the same way. You have there's three buttons on your calculator. You should see sine and cosine next to your tangent buttons. It's going to do the same thing tangent did. Only now we get to use the hypotenuse. Number one, using this triangle, they want us to find the sine of t, the cosine of t, the sine of g, and the cosine of g. Find the ratios of them. So you don't even need your calculator right now. I just want you to put the ratios down. Another word for ratio is a fraction. So I'm going to start with angle T since they listed that first. Label the sides of the triangle based on that angle, just like we started with yesterday. Opposite of T is 12. Adjacent to T is 16. And 20 is my hypotenuse. So SOHCAHTOA tells us that sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So the sine of t is going to be 12 over 20. Ratios have to be written in simplest forms. It tells us that it's 12 over 20 in simplest form. Now what goes into both? 4. Good. So then we'd get 3/5. Cosine of t. SOHCAHTOA says cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So this time we're going to put 16 over 20, reduce by, and you get, good. Sine of g, going to angle G, you have to be careful. Your opposite and adjacent sides change. 16 becomes the opposite, and 12 becomes your adjacent side. The hypotenuse will always stay the same. So then the sine of g, opposite over hypotenuse, is 16 over 20, which becomes 4/5. The cosine of g is adjacent over hypotenuse, 12 over 20, which is 3/5. Half of your quiz is that. Just writing the ratios and making sure they're in simplest form. So like 2 questions like that. Okay? Number 2, you can use sine, cosine, and tangent to find the height of tall things in life. In this case, we're going to find the height of a flagpole. So it says a 20-foot wire supporting a flagpole forms a 35-degree angle with the flagpole. To the nearest foot, how high is the flagpole? Trying to find the height of the flagpole, so I'm going to call that x. The wire and the flagpole form a 35-degree angle. Since that's the angle they give me, I'm going to label the triangle based on that. So x, opposite, adjacent, or hypotenuse to the 35-degree angle. Adjacent, good. And 20 is my good. SOHCAHTOA, adjacent, hypotenuse. Which of our three trig functions do we want to use? Cosine, yeah, because that's the one that has adjacent and hypotenuse. So the cosine of 35 degrees equals x over 20. It's always the angle measure that goes in right behind the word. To get x by itself, what do I have to do? Multiply both sides by 20. So then you have 20 times the cosine of 35 equals x. This one says to go to the nearest foot. So make sure you know how to do it on your calculator. Make sure you know where your buttons are. What did you guys come up with? 16. Good. You should get 16. If you're not, rework it in your calculator so you know how to use it. Cool. Third one. A right triangle has a leg length of 1.5 units and a hypotenuse of 4. Find the measure of its acute angles to the nearest degree. So you have to find the measure of angle A and the measure of angle B here. Which one do you want to find first? Okay. Angle B, 1.5 is going to be opposite if 4 is my hypotenuse. SOHCAHTOA, which one should we use? The first one. What is the first one? What trig function is it? Sine, right? Sine, yep. So then we'll say the sine of angle B equals the opposite, 1.5, over the hypotenuse 4. And when you want to find an angle measure, what do we punch in the calculator? The inverse, the 1 to the -1. So for most of you, it'll be second sine, and then 1.5 divided by 4. This one wants us to round to the nearest degree. Here, you wrote 4.5.
Oh, 4.2.
22. How are we going to find the measure of angle A? Good. Use a triangle sum theorem. You don't have to use a trig function to find A. If B is 22 and we know C is 90, all three of these have to add up to 180. You should get 68. If you use a trig function, you should still get 68 for the measure of angle A. Go ahead and do number 4 on the top of the other side. Since you know that when you write the ratios, you're going to have to reduce them, I look to the triangle first and see if I can reduce the side lengths. So when I look at my triangle, 80, 48, and 64, I know that 8's going to go into each of those, so I would reduce it right away. 10, 6, 8. Okay, well, they're still even, so I can keep reducing by 2, 4, 5, and 3. Now I don't have to reduce over here. I've already reduced my lengths. So when I go to do the sine of x, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. You should have 4/5. cosine of x adjacent over hypotenuse, you should have 3/5. Then for y, your opposite and adjacent switch. So the sine of y is going to be 3/5, and the cosine of y will be 4/5. Sorry, here, let me see that. Okay, so you can reduce first, or you can reduce at the end. Doesn't really matter. The second half says, how is the sine of x, my top one, and the cosine of y, the very bottom one, related? Yeah, they're the same ratio. The sine of one angle, like if this was 30 degrees, the sine of 30 degrees is going to be the same as the cosine of this one, which would be 60. Or if this was 22 and this was whatever the other hand number would have to be, the sine of this one is always going to be the same as the cosine of the other one, and vice versa. Their tangents, yesterday we talked about, are reciprocals of each other. They just flip. Questions? Okay, do the next flag one, number 5 on your own.